So this is where it all started about 20 years ago here. You know, a little more actually now. In these woods right here is where I started on the logging of this farm right here. And on this section over here, there wasn't much in there. It was just pretty much swamp. A couple hundred yards that way, you'll start seeing where there's maple again. These begin to come back. I think it was probably 2002 when I logged that out. And a lot of these trees are coming back, you know. And this side over here was a swamp, and it was just scrub to begin with. So there isn't really much in there. I see a nice hickory right there. We're going to leave it. And then maples. And then continued on that way for quite some time. That was the first year or two, logging firewood and stuff like that. That was with, I don't know, I had a 272, I also had a 365 in the mix somewhere. But I was into vintage home lights at the time. And a lot of that work got done with 903s and 925s and stuff like that. I kind of miss it because it was fun, you know, it was a lot of fun. You know, and then as we worked around, did some other jobs. This section over here, I logged it out, I don't know, 2008, 9, 10, somewhere in that range. I can't remember exactly when, but this was at one time a sugar bush. And the funny thing is, some of the trees really took off in terms of gaining diameter, and some didn't. Like this one right here with that little bulge, that was a tap tree, and I don't think it's changed. I don't think it's changed its shape 10 years. Where the one right next to it and some of these over here have actually changed quite a bit. So some of them took off and some of them didn't. I didn't plan on touching this woods here, you know, for another, say, 10 years. That was the game plan. And I was going to take a couple of these at some point, but I don't know. I don't see the big need to do it right now. I'll let them stay. Keep the flavor of the woods. I am going to take that one right there with the diseased section up there. That's going to come down. And over here somewhere, there's a, yeah, right there, there's a cluster. And I'm going to pick one of the cluster and take it, just so the other ones have more resource. That's kind of the game. Today, you know, it was one of those in-between days. I've got projects and stuff, and there's subjects online that are of interest, and I just kind of felt the need to come out in the woods, but I don't like to come out and just play. I got a lot of firewood to do. I've got a lot of tops to pull, stuff like that for firewood in the out years. And I've got these 3 project saws that, in various states of completion, just need to have some time to debug them. Now this one right here, you've seen actually on a couple of videos, because I was using it for felling. Oh, probably another half a mile that way. And it actually cuts good once it gets running. That's the one where I had to sort out the carburetor. I'm actually going to go back to the original carburetor, figure out what it is. It's kind of embarrassing, but I did figure out it's boggle. I'm not sure I can claim credit for it. But that's got the big bore highway with a pop-up, and I just simply couldn't pull it over. So the modification I made on this saw was, one, putting another chain brake paddle on it. By the way, I have an OEM one I found, so if this one breaks, I'm going to replace that with OEM. And the second is, I took that decomp and drilled the holes out quite a bit to see whether or not it would drop the compression to the point where I could pull it over. That's a saw mod that might matter. And that's a sharpened chain. You know, it's got some time on it. And that bar is a year old now. Believe that? I had 3 of them. They all look the same. So I spread the load over 3 of those Husqvarna bars over the last year, and they all look just like that. And I think I did have to take the burr off of one. That one's pretty good still. Those bars have really done well. This bar is a year old as well. I had bought that to put on the blue 288, which I still haven't finished. It's got some issues, but I still haven't finished. And got some time on it, but doesn't have anywhere near the time that one has. So that one's the Chinese one. It's kind of my new version of Cyclops. I want it ugly, half Chinese, half OEM. The hard parts are now pretty much all OEM, including the crankshaft and the piston, right? Carburetor is still Chinese. Cylinder itself is Chinese. Cases are Chinese. But the crank and the piston are OEM. And I think I'll put an OEM side cover on it. Pull start. Yeah, that's an OEM pull start. The other one didn't hold up. Yeah, that's a broken, but still an OEM side cover. And I put a new chain on it, so I'm probably going to use this one to fell that tree. And or that one, if I can get that one started. That one is such an easy saw to run for felling it. I mean, yeah, it's big and heavy, but it's just got easy power. You don't stall it easy. And then maybe I have enough diameter we can do some cookie cuts and compare the two 70cc saws, right? I sharpened that chain. I've got a new one to put on there. But this one here, I hit barbed wire. It was a brand new chain, and I hit barbed wire with it. Now, the way I sharpen, I'm not going to use that for felling. I'll use that for blocking, just simply because it'll be a little too grabby. It'll self-feed, but that's usually too grabby to bore cut with. So one of these other two saws will have to do that job. But I want to see if I can get them started. And on the felling side, you know, I've said it a bunch of times, I'm no expert, so I just tell you what I've done. I find it kind of interesting that there's sort of this online argument in one of the sites about where to get your advice from. And I would say there's a few things that I have learned in that regard over the last few years, and I'm going to say it. It's going to create me trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway. The whole discussion about felling is one of the more important ones to have online. And there's a variety of different ways of approaching it. You know, I pretty much have derived my style over a period of time and moved from what I had learned as a young kid in Alabama doing pulpwood, which was your standard face cut, back cut type thing where you just cut from the back and give yourself enough of a hinge to keep the tree going where you want. But it's all pine, it breaks, and they're not that big in diameter, so bore cutting doesn't make any sense at all for two reasons. One, the hinge breaks, and you don't have pulls and stuff like that. Two, it doesn't matter because it's pulpwood. And three, they're not that big in diameter. They're too small to sit there and stick a bar through them. It's just a waste of time. So standard face cut, back cut's the way to go on those trees. Now, think about it. A guy who grew up doing that, you know, maybe the trees run from 8 to 24 inches what they're going to use, and that's his life. Never has to deal with the hardwoods. He's an expert, and that's what he does, and his approach works, and it's safe. The other thing is with the trees like that is usually they're tall, relatively symmetric. Not always, but relatively symmetric. And there's a lot of resistance in that top as it goes through the air. So when I finally cut that tree to let it go, even if it's a smaller diameter tree, it doesn't go fast. So the idea of chasing the tree or cutting to the hinge still makes a little bit of sense because nothing's happened fast. You got plenty of time to do that. You can watch the tree and see if it's moving, take a little more. When it starts moving, you walk away, you know. Where I'm going with this is in certain regions, there's been a lot of smart people for a very long time that have figured out safe and effective ways of cutting their trees. So my advice, and I hope people listen to this, is instead of going online and then reaching across regions where there's going to be these battles about how to fell a tree based on the experience they have with the equipment and the trees that they have, maybe stay a little more local and find the experts in your area who hold training courses and have honed their craft on the same kind of trees that you're going to cut. I would say that's probably a better way to start. For my area, for example, I'm going to say it again, I said in one of my prior videos, the folks that do the game of logging type training are probably the best and safest. And you can argue that they may not be the fastest, but for what we do here, the kind of wood, kind of terrain, that would be my suggestion for the Northeast, is to go that route. And there's a lot of different names that are associated with that, but I've posted a couple of videos from another fella who I really think has got his shit together when it comes to training that. And I'm not going to go any further, but that's where I would go from this part of the country. Out west, I'd go a different direction because they have different scenarios, and the Canadians have a certification process, and we have a certification process in some of the state woods and things like that. Point being, regionally, it's been thought about. Go find the experts, get trained. The style I use usually is about trees that are 20 to 30 inches in diameter, so they're large enough to justify bore cut. The ones I used to cut as a kid didn't. I mean, I don't think I ever cut a tree more than 18 inches. It was all pine, so that required something different. And, you know, maybe I should do a follow-up video and point out that, yeah, bore cut on that tree right there makes absolutely no sense. But that tree right there, borderline, actually does. Now, I could probably just do a conventional cut on that. It would be fine. Now, another thing I want to point out on hinges, I've made a point about this before, is I want my 70 degrees, but I can rotate that almost to a Humboldt. It doesn't really matter the orientation, just so long as I get that 70. And one of the guys had pointed out is when you do a cut right down this way, it's a tough cut to make because of the orientation to the grain. So actually rotating that out where you're cutting more cross grain, it's easier and faster to make that cut, assuming you have the coordination, the ability to line things up, you know. That's fair, and that's also good advice. And my mission today is to put this one down, maybe do some cookies so we can compare the 572 to the, I don't know what I call that thing. It's ugly. The ugly saw, the Fugly, there you go. That's Fugly. That's not. I'm going to paint that muffler. Actually, I had it, just came off. I'm going to scuff it up again and paint it again, I think. And I did put this full wrap on. And now you have to understand clearly why I did that. It's because I screwed up in the angle. And you can see where this one is relative to the bucking spike. Well, this one was right on the bucking spike, basically. So by putting these longer bucking spikes on there, I'll let that muffler have some clearance. The cover it had was a little bit beat up, so I put the new cover, which essentially is a step backwards because it's just a 372 painted gray with the bar nuts not captured like a true 500 series, you know. And I put the full wrap on because this saw here is going to be a channel saw, and I want it to look a little nicer. And as much as I think the full wrap is a waste of time for me out here because it gets in the way, I think they look cool. So if I'm just blocking wood and doing general work for the channel, why the heck not? They look cool. Evaluate how it works in my world over time. Things like, do I have easy access to the bar nuts? You know, when you lay it on its side to put fuel in it, does it balance properly? Stuff like that. Just stupid stuff that matters to me but nobody else. But you can see here that I now have enough distance between the muffler and the bucking spikes where this doesn't turn into a bucking spike. But so that modification is a failure for me. And actually this one is too before I even use it, because it's not going to make my life any easier. So if the definition is about looks, well then this one right here is a success. So I guess it depends on what you call the definition of win. I'm really curious to see if this chain, man, it was wrecked. So I'm very curious to see whether or not my hand grinding on that, a little bit impatient, actually produces a cutting chain. Yeah, I can't get that big one to start. I just can't pull it over fast enough. It's not worth me hurting my back. So I'm probably going to take that saw and just send it down the road. Just too much. Alright, back to the felon. That thing's idling nice. You know, it's been sitting there putting now for a couple of minutes. I'm going to try to drop that tree. I'll show you what I'm looking at. I want to avoid that tree. I want to avoid that, so it's a wide area. And I want to avoid those. I want to turn right down there. And it's only leading a little bit that way, so it shouldn't be hard to make happen. But I'm looking at a tree that's been tapped. See right there in the middle where that bulge is? Those were taps were. So I'm going to cut as low as I can. But I'm probably going to cut that off with a log. But I don't want to hit metal. So I'll start my face cut. And then I'll do my bore cut. Before I do that, I'm going to take a couple little trees out of the way. So it'll be the ghost saw. So anyway, I got the face cut in. If this was a ash tree, I'd focus a little bit more and open that face up a little bit. I probably cut up from the bottom at an angle a little more, and just to make sure that when that closes, the hinge is either broke or damn close to being broke. The tree's almost on the ground. And you can see this is going to be an interesting year. You see that maple syrup already begin to flow. So this is an interesting year. So what I'll do here is I'm going to bore cut from the side. One of the things I don't think we focus on as much as I should possibly is how in fact do you get the bore cut to start. And obviously you don't want that portion of the tip from here to here to catch and toss that thing back in your face. So you'll see I'll take that blade and I'll cut in that way first until I know I got it supported before I push it back. And I think that's critical. So I'll do that, get started. I'm going to leave a bit of that root flare in the back for holdwood. But focus on how I get that thing started, because it's really hard to start a bore cut if you have too grabby a chain or you have the angle of the bar too perpendicular to the tree. You got to start at an angle, work your way in, and then work your way to the plunge. Two things. One, I cut right to there from the other side because it was pretty easy to line that up, you know, working from the other side. It's a lot easier to cut from the back of the tree to the hinge than trying to plunge in and then keep that tip at some guesstimate away from the hinge. And I'm going to have to take that little piece of holdwood and then I'm going to set a wedge and then step back and look over my situation and see if I got what I'm looking for. But the other thing I'll notice is that saw is really good. You notice I was able to leave it in the tree, let it idle. It didn't shut off until I shut it off. And it's an easy one pull starter once that saw needs to be restarted after I've got it, you know, fired up from cold and warmed up and all that. It's a one pull starter. And the second thing, without the full wrap, I can get pretty close to the ground. In this case, the reason I'm not getting as far down as I normally would, there's no timber in that. So there's really no sense in getting a whole lot closer. This tree here, I got as much as I wanted to because of the way the roots were exposed. And I cut away some over there, put the saw to bore cut. And because it was a normal handle, I didn't have any interference with that root down below. So now the tree is sitting right where I want it. It's not going anywhere. It's not moving. Most of the way cut. A production guy is going to say, hey, you're wasting time. But if you're logging on my place, I'm saying you got time to evaluate and safely determine whether or not the cut you made is what you want. And if not, now you can change your plans versus having to do it real time once that tree is moving. Because if you cut from the back, work your way to the hinge, trying to look up to see if it's moving or not, once that tree gets moving, you no longer have control. And what happens often, and I don't care who you are, you could be the god of tree cutting. Once that tree is moving, if there's anything up there that's entangled or hanging, that's when it comes down. Cutting to the hinge from the back, waiting for the tree to move. You look up, that's when the branch hits you right in the face. You know what I'm saying? So by doing it this way, nothing's moving. Nothing's moving. So I don't have to sit there and look up and wait for things to happen. I can step back here and evaluate before I take those last couple of cuts, and then just get the heck out of there. Make your cut and move. On this one here, I don't believe I need a wedge. We'll cut that. I got to cut that one little piece first, and then I'll step back a little bit, make sure I got what I think I got, and then we're gonna cut the tree free. The extra few seconds it takes to do cut the back strap, the trigger wood, the hole wood, whatever you want to call it, it's worth it. It's worth the time. That's a safe operation right there, and look at that. I got something I can do cookies on. So let's do that.